Well, good morning, Southern Oregon, and welcome to the Real Estate Show. Pete Belcastro and Alice Lema. We are here. We're brokers in Southern Oregon with John L. Scott, and we have had another interesting week in our local housing market, haven't we, Pete?
Well, I got to tell you, your string of 2 weeks of increased listings ended last week. I hate to tell you that, Alice. Listings were down again.
Well,
Honey,
it depends, but
I
you
know.
go ahead because overall,
For
you're right.
for my
Overall, you're right.
235 this last week. Okay, it just went down. Josephine County is under 100 listings, as is Klamath County again, in stick-built homes. So and that's all price ranges. And still in Jackson County, over half of our market in Jackson County is $500,000 for sale and above. So, nothing's changed. As we talked, this has been the same way for how many weeks now? We did see a little spike in listings, but they're kind of back down again because people are still out there. So it's springtime coming. We're going to see what's going to happen. Today, by the way, which is going to be an interesting show because Marty Easter from the DEQ, Oregon's DEQ, and people have all sorts of opinions about the Department of Environmental Quality over the years. My goodness. But we're going to talk about septic systems today and septic tanks. And that's going to be a really apropos because we're in spring. A lot of rural properties obviously are being sold, and tens of thousands of these exist out there, Alice, and they can create all sorts of problems in a transaction. They can be good and bad. And what happens when one fails? When do I use one if I'm going to add on to something? So what great questions we got today from Marty. I can't wait to talk to him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We love having DEQ on, and septics are such an important part of our life here in Southern Oregon. And, with all these new people coming into our area who maybe are not used to country property, it's a really big deal. And you got to have a real estate agent help you in most cases who's knowledgeable about country property and knowledgeable about septic so that you don't get a house that's got a problem, because it can be very, very expensive to repair. And every once in a while, you have to actually put in a whole new one. And with all the water we have here, rivers and creeks, it's even more complicated and even more expensive if that all has to happen near water.
Yeah, and where you place them and the kind of soils we have all come into this, and it can be a huge problem for a lot of sales. And you're right. The first thing I do is when I go onto a rural property, I look for the tank, I look for the fields just to see where they even are, and on it goes. So we're going to have an interesting show coming up to hear about the latest in what's going on with this across the region.
Yeah, and we just love when we have DEQ on because they are a wealth of knowledge, and Marty Easter is definitely one of our favorite people. So we will be right back. This is Alice Lema and Pete Belcastro, and we hope you will stay with us for our interview with Marty Easter, DEQ. Don't touch that dial. Well, welcome back, folks, to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema here with my co-host, Pete Belcastro. We're both real estate brokers, John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. And today's show is brought to you by our local sponsor, the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. So we thank them very much. And we're so excited to have Marty Easter back. Marty Easter is he's with DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality here in the state of Oregon. He's one of our favorite guests. He is the DEQ Environmental Health Specialist and works with the on-site wastewater program, which is a long mouthful. We're talking about septics, right?
That's it. Yep.
So welcome, Marty.
Hey, thank you for having me.
And septics are really important. Pete and I talk to people constantly about septics. And before we went back on the air, Pete was just saying that there's just tens of thousands of septics in our area.
Yeah, my boss even recently, she is new to the program, and she said, "How many septics are out there?" Quite recently, actually. And I said, "I don't know if we can quantify that." There are a ton of septic systems out there. I mean, really anyone who's not on the city sewer is on septic, whether they know it or not.
Well, that's an interesting situation. Pete, have you ever met anybody who was in the country on a septic and didn't realize it? That would be quite a shock.
Well, I think the issue is that think of it this way. We sell hundreds of rural properties in Jackson County in Southern Oregon every year. And these properties are 20, make up 25% of the sales. But the issue is that so many people come here are new, who come from cities, who've never experienced living on a rural property with a septic system, have no idea what it is, are not even sure how it works. Most people still don't know how they work. And so you're on a well and you're on septic. It changes the way you do things. And so when you think of that, Alice, there's thousands of them out there. And so, Marty, how many, I mean, what are the different types that people have that you ask about? I mean, there's a sand system, I know, and different ones like that, but what are the general systems that are out there that people are using right now?
Yeah, great question. So when we go out and we permit systems, or the systems that are already in the ground, fall into some pretty loose categories. The first one, and the one that everyone wants, is a standard septic system. And that standard septic system is just a septic tank, and then it's followed by a drain field. And then so all the water in your home, all the effluent, will go to that septic tank first, and then it'll leach out into the ground and through that drain field, which is usually, especially if your system's pretty aged, just perforated pipe and rock. That's kind of the easiest, the one that everyone wants because it's the cheapest as well. So we are still putting those systems in. We still approve standard systems. That's always a question we get, as these different technologies and different upgraded types of systems come online. People think that we don't permit those standard systems anymore, and we do. So that's the first good question. Then if you have a water table issue, or you don't have very deep soil, you can then go to what's called a capping fill system. Basically the same components are there, except instead of the drain lines being 2 to 3 feet deep, they're up around anywhere from a foot to 18 inches. And because of that, because it rains here, we want to make sure that we put some soil cover over the top, so that over time that it's not eroded off and those drain lines become visible. But then, like you said, Pete, there's a sand filter system and an ATT, which is short for advanced treatment technology. These two are the ones, especially Jackson County. We got some good areas of soil, but Jackson County is kind of notorious for not having the best soil. And so, or a lack of soil before you get to some pretty rough stuff. So a majority of these are sand filter ATTs, and that sand filter is an older technology. You may be driving down the road out in the country and see a big mound in someone's yard. That's most likely either a motorcycle jump or a sand filter. Hopefully it's not both, but I've seen that too. And ATTs have kind of taken over that sand filter, where it used to be a 36-foot by 10-foot box that's 4 feet high. Now ATTs, this advanced treatment technologies, there's a couple different manufacturers. They're a little bit bigger, or a little bit smaller than a septic tank, and they go right into the ground. And so if you've ever seen them, they're just usually have like a plastic lid, and then all the inner workings with pumps and filters inside there. That is the most expensive, but they're also getting the best treatment by far.
Do you know that I had a client actually out in Sam's Valley we bought a property in which the seller had installed one of those ATT systems. And I'm telling you, I've never seen anything so advanced in my life. Alice, it's like having your own septic pump, because they say at the end, the water comes out and you can drink that water. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how these systems operate. And they also operate by like high technology stuff, because you have to tell it when you're using it, when you're not using it, how many people are going to be in the house, and all sorts of things. So that's how far advanced septic systems have come today. And as you say, we're seeing them a lot more. I asked the seller there how much he paid for that system, Marty. He said he paid $35,000 to put that system in. Is that kind of a more or less as accurate figure, you think?
Yeah, I'd say it's in that ballpark for sure. It kind of depends on how big the drain field is as well. All of those advanced, the ATTs and sand filters, they also need a maintenance provider contract. So like you said, it's basically like having your own sewage treatment plant at your house now, right? A lot smaller than what's at the city. but there's so many different things to clean, and the filters make sure they're clean. But yeah, price wise, yeah, I we don't know. I don't know exactly how much they cost, and it probably is dependent on who is putting it in. But yeah, that's probably ballpark, 20, 25, 30, somewhere in there. Yeah.
So
Wow.
do you approve many of these, or in the overcall of, say, of a year for you in Jackson County, since that's where you're working mostly at, would you say that you approve, I don't know, say 100, or how many you approve, but how many of those would be in the ATT thing, the sand, and the regular systems, would you estimate?
Yeah, and this is a real big estimation. I would say somewhere around probably 50%. And again, it kind of depends on where you're at too. If you're in
Okay.
Sam's Valley, like you were saying,
Right.
there's some pretty thick clay.
Right.
A lot of people
Yeah.
sometimes call it like black sticky or black mud because it's really high density clay that in the summertime you may walk out there and there's big cracks in the ground. And then when it starts raining, that clay soaks up all that water and those cracks shut. Horrible types of soil to have a septic system in, with all those pipes getting moved. And but yeah, we are able to approve quite a bit of ATTs out there as well. But yeah, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you're along the river, some of those smaller lots, you may get into, the only thing that'll fit is like a bottomless sand filter or something with a really short line. So it's kind of all over the board. Jackson County and Southern Oregon in general just have a ton of different types of soil. And so but it kind of depends on where you're at. So
What is a bottomless sand filter? I've never heard of that.
yeah, great question. The sand filters, the conventional ones where they have a tank and then a sand filter box and then goes out to a drain field. Like I said, it was a little bit of an older technology. I probably haven't seen a sand filter go in a couple years because ETTs are just, I don't want to say a lot better, but easier to maintain, easier to install. So a bottomless sand filter though is really still a great technology to have. It basically, like I said, think of one of those river lots. It's small, and y'all in the real estate market may see this all the time. You're like, okay, here's the tank. I'm not sure where it's going because this is only, half an acre, maybe less. These bottomless sand filters, what they do, it goes to a tank like normal, and then you still have the 360 square foot sand filter. But usually that soil is a coarse sand underneath it, not going to get held up, none of that effluent that's coming out of the sand filter. So there's just there's no bottom to it, and it just continues to perk through the soil that way and get back to the water table.
Wow. So those waterfront properties are tricky anyway. If they've already been developed, some of those septics were located so long ago. And it's kind of scary because sometimes when you're looking to purchase one of those, it's not okay the way they did it back in the day. And they used materials that may have been disintegrated. So can we talk a little bit about how sensitive the waterfront areas are and what kind of things you look for when you're out before you buy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's interesting. I can almost tell when some of these tricky properties come on the market because we'll get a lot of calls from a lot of
Oh,
realtors and potential buyers, and it kind of comes in waves. But yeah, you really want to make sure that the tank is pumped. Make sure that tank's okay. Make sure that many of the pumpers and installers have cameras. They can camera the lines. Let's see where this thing's really going to, because the last thing you want to do is get into a new home, whether it's on the river or not, and then all of a sudden you got a problem. Look for also, is there an area to replace the septic system?
oh, that's a good idea.
When everything fails, hopefully I never go back to any site that I've gone out to before. And I even say to people, I hope I never see you out here again. I'll see you in the grocery store, but I don't want to see you out here ever again because that usually means something's wrong. So yeah, when you're out there with your clients or your clients are out looking for property, how small is it? You've got a well setback that you need to watch out for, right? To 100 feet. You've got, if it's a riverfront property, especially if it's a year round, you've got a 100-foot setback to that. If it's seasonal, like the creek dries up at some time of the year, then you've got 50-foot setback. But every site's so different. Not only your well, where's the neighbor's well? You know, so all these things can be really tricky, and we've got a lot of tools that we can use to try to get someone an approved septic system. But be careful. Be really careful. Ask all the questions before you sign, and just make sure you know what you're walking into.
Yeah, and we've got a break coming up pretty quick here, but I didn't realize that you took calls from the general public, but you do.
Yeah, absolutely. They usually go to our front office, and if it's a technical question, our front office is really going to be being able to answer some of the basic questions about applications and things. But yeah, any technical questions that anyone has, we can look up septic records for them. We can do any of that. And I say, hey, let's talk. I'll take all the time that anyone needs to a point to try to help them out.
It's a fascinating subject, and there's so many rural properties here in Southern Oregon. It's great to have you. We're talking to Marty Easter today. He's with the Department of Environmental Quality, which we lovingly call DEQ, and we're so lucky to have him. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lema will be right back with a quick word from our sponsor. Do not touch that dial. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lema here with Pete Belcastro. We're both real estate brokers at John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. And we're delighted to have Marty Easter here today from DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, talking to us about wastewater management, which is a fancy way of talking about septics. And during the break, Pete and I were talking a little bit about what's going on.
What's going on? Well,
it's been such an interesting week in real estate world here in Southern Oregon.
Well, it's interesting that Marty's here, because I would assume that with the onslaught of rural properties, sales that we've seen and go on with them, a lot of people move on to these properties, Alice, and they say, well, the septic works, but does the septic work right? And is it large enough if I'm going to change my property out and things like that? And so the question becomes, how do I do that? What do I do? Do I need a permit to change my septic out, because I think it's too small, or I'm going to build a larger house on it, and you're replacing it, and your septic tank, was built in 1920, so there's lots of things like that. So I'm curious, Marty, as to our market, of course, is really, as you know, inventory is way low and demand is real high. How busy are you in your area of issuing permits? Is it a lot? Is it few? Or tell us what that is going on with you.
Yeah, still really busy. And just as a side note, so we used to do Jackson and Josephine County. And then in November of last year, Josephine County took over the program, and now they're run at the county level, which is great. They're doing a great job. But I kind of maybe selfishly said, I wonder how busy we're going to be. Jackson and Josephine County kind of historically have always been like the third busiest county or office in the state, behind Deschutes County up in Bend and Clackamas up north. And so I was like, wow, how busy are we really going to be? This might be a quieter time. And we have been just really, really busy. I even took off a couple days for spring break this past week. And when I came in, those racks were full up of all sorts of things, permits. And one question that you had, Pete, was on the, when you go out to a property and you're going to buy a home, but you want a bigger home to get put on, right? What do you do? First off, I would say, if that's your plan, make sure that you look at the septic records. See how big the system was sized for. Pete, like Pete said, was it back in the 50s when there really was no permits and we don't really know what's out there? Has everything disintegrated and the soil's just kind of taking the brunt of it? Or is it within the past couple years? Septic records are pretty good, starting about the mid 70s,
right,
and on. So you can get kind of a hit and miss before that. But if we can find how big the system is, know what the soil type is, then we
Okay.
can usually be able to give somebody an answer on, yeah, you could go up to a 5-bedroom without having to expand anything, but if you went any further, you would need to get some additional stuff.
That happens a lot at Lake of the Woods, for example, because people will have an old cabin, they're going to build a new cabin on it, but the old one was put in 1920, and so you have to have a new septic system, and people freak. So I always tell people, or for buyers, I should say, I don't know if Alice, you do the same thing. When we find ourselves in these situations, the septic has got to be part of it, and the buyer needs to be aware that they may have to replace that particular system if they're going to expand it or use it. And that's really good advice. How often, I'm curious as to how often these things fail. Do you do a lot of permitting on that? When failure comes, I got to come to you, or tell us what happens when all of a sudden I smell something that I shouldn't be smelling, and I know where it's coming from, and I don't want to face the reality of it, but I eventually will have to.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do all sorts of things. One is a site evaluation, which is basically a bare piece of property. We go out and evaluate the soil and say, hey, you can put this type of system on. We do like what we just said, Pete, about an authorization notice. If I add another bedroom, can I on my system? And then the other real big avenue for us is repairs. And that's a pretty wide area of what it could be. Is it just a tank? Is your tank old? And one thing that we have seen quite a bit of lately is that I've seen is new tanks being put on right after or right before real estate transactions. Often, it's tough to tell if a drain field's working properly. Especially if the home was, let's say, vacant, it's real tough to tell then, but you can usually at least pump a tank out, have an inspection done of that. Now we get to that's called a minor repair, just a tank, usually a pretty good switch out. If you've got an installer, they're really good about being able to swap those out pretty quickly. The other one is what we call a major repair, or a repair of the drain field. Like you said, you smell something, the ground has a little ponding out there. I would absolutely call up, a pumper or a licensed professional, if nothing else, just to say, what do you think? We got a lot of really good licensed professionals here in Southern Oregon that are, trust me, they are super busy. They're not like they're trying to drum up business. They really do just want to make sure that when you got that peace of mind is huge. And especially in a real estate transaction, once you just get into a new home, that's the last thing you want to worry about is, oh, great, now my septic system's not working. So,
But if you have bubbling ooze coming out of the ground, whether it's a house you're looking at buying or you own it, it's way too late at that point, don't you think?
yeah, I mean, there's products that they say that can help with some of these issues, but honestly, by that point, the soil's pretty saturated, and that's a tough thing to overcome. So yeah, at that point, I would say you're most likely going to need to pick out a new area if you don't already have one, and get some test pits out there, and let's put in a new drain field for you.
What is it? What is a test pit?
Yeah, test pit, great question. So when we get called out, let's say it's a property owner who's having some issues, wants to do a major repair on their system, we go out and they dig a 4-foot deep, 2-foot wide trench that's got basically stepped or sloped. A predecessor once said, it's easy for me to fall in, but I can't fall out of these things. So a way that we can come back out. So that's what a test pit is. It's really just kind of a hole in the ground that we look for different horizons. We're looking, what type of soil is this? Where is there indications of water? And a bunch of different things. But based off of those findings, then we can put that into a permit. What type of system? Is it a standard system? Is it an ATT? And then how big the drain field is going to have to be on that. But yeah, so that's what a test pit is.
So in a lot of places in Southern Oregon, the water table is really what I call close to the surface. Some of those original hand dug wells were like 20 and 30 feet. So if you're digging a test pit and it's filling up with water, what do you do then?
Yeah, great question. Kind of depends on the property. If it's a flat property, that is really tough. Because if you have any slope at all, even 3 to 5% slope, you can put what's called a curtain drain on it, almost like a French drain, where you can umbrella, put this up above the system, upslope of it, and you can dewater that area, which is great. And I've seen work really well. But if it's a flat site, that's really hard. So it kind of depends on where it's at. You know, if it's below 18 inches, you might be able to have a certain type of system. If it's a certain soil type, you may be in, Alice, like we're talking about, a bottomless sand filter area. So many different factors, but yeah, that is one factor that's really hard to overcome. We can overcome just about everything, but that water is tough.
So that's interesting because, I'm sorry, Pete.
No,
Most people want a flat lot. So that's kind of in conflict. Sorry, go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
But not generally in a rural area, probably where you're talking about, they would need a septic system. But okay, here, it's going to be easier now to add additional dwelling units onto rural properties. We've been seeing that coming. We can do it in Medford now. They have that great program for 18 months where they're waiving their fees for additional dwelling units. I want to put additional dwelling units, say, on my rural property where I have a septic system and a well. I mean, so are generally, as you see these come on, Marty, are people having to put their own septic system in with the additional dwelling units, or can they tie them in together? Or do you approve those things? Because I see more and more of that coming, multifamily units in rural properties together. Alice always talks about that. So is that happening out there? And what's your recommendation to people who are in that situation?
Definitely. Yeah, the ADU issue has been really high in our office, especially. Jackson and Josephine County have a ton of requests for this. So what I tell everybody, kind of not to be a broken record, call DEQ first. It's all based on a couple things. One is, what was your system sized for? It's usually a gallons per day. Just very basic. If you have 4 bedrooms, that's sized at 450 gallons per day. So if you put on what we have been sizing these ADUs at, is a 2-bedroom home. Some systems can handle that without having to put a new septic in. So that's great. We would love to do that. That's the easiest way, but we have to make sure that that your records are there. Because if they're not, or else your system can't handle it per rule, then you'd have to start it at kind of square one. And so what I always say is, don't just apply for an authorization notice in this type of a case. I always say, hey, give us a call, take 5-10 minutes of our time, and if you do have to go that route and you do have to put your own septic system in, let's not dump the money into an authorization notice. Let's put it towards those test pits, that site evaluation, and that new system going in. So that's one thing that we've tried to provide, because these are tough situations. There's a lot of people that are displaced out there and who now have family that say, maybe I can get an ADU on my property. And so we're trying our best to help that situation as much as possible, but every single situation is different.
And I always say you want to do this while the counties are looking kindly to letting you do an ADU, because normally they don't like higher density living in low density areas. So just a note to our listeners, if you're thinking about that, call Marty now. Marty Easter from the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, Pete Belcastro and Alice Lema. We're all here talking on the Real Estate Show about septics in Southern Oregon. Today's show is brought to you by our local Rogue Valley Association Realtors. We so appreciate them. We're also sponsored by John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon and Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, Guy Giles. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lema, and Marty Easter will be right back. So do not touch that dial. Well, welcome back, Southern Oregon, to the Real Estate Show. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lema. We're here both from John L. Scott Real Estate. We're both brokers here. And we're talking to Marty Easter of DEQ about septics and water and things like that. And one of the things we mentioned earlier on was ponds. Is that something that DEQ monitors?
In the septic program, we don't. We may get a complaint of maybe somebody dumping into a pond or things like that. A majority of that, especially the inspection portion, I want to say is with the water master. I've gone on a couple of complaint inspections with them, and that's been a great great source of learning for me. But there may be a couple different DEQ programs that touch on that, but not the on-site septic one.
So are you saying somebody complains that somebody's septic is draining into a waterway?
Yeah, it could be somebody draining, so maybe it's upslope of a pond. And or I've had others where they say, hey, so-and-so is dumping a pumper truck into a pond, things like that. And so we've got to go out and do some complaints.
Yeah, and probably testing, and that sounds
Yeah.
like that could be a pretty big ticket if you get caught doing that. That's pretty bad.
Oh yeah, there's.
I didn't realize people did that.
Yeah, you'd be amazed. But yeah, the ones that I was out on, nothing was happening, but just the concerned person that wanted us to go check it out, so we did.
Yeah. So is there a risk if your waterway is below somebody else's septic? Is there a risk that it's going to get contaminated?
There always could be. I think there's always a risk there. As long as everything stays subsurface, it's a pretty small risk. For years, 50 feet to a well was kind of the standard. That was in the rules. Now it's 100 foot, because it doesn't take very much soil to actually treat this effluent once it's in the ground. Pete even talked about, those ATTs, when the effluent comes out of those ATTs, it's said, maybe drink it. Don't drink it. First off, please don't. But it is very clean compared to the effluent that's coming straight out of a septic tank. But with these setbacks nowadays, there's not very much risk unless there is a failure and some of that effluent is on the ground surface running towards your well, things like that. So.
And people should be getting their well tested more often than just buying and selling anyway, in my opinion. So speaking of testing, how often would you suggest homeowners have their septic system inspected? Like every how many years would you think it should get looked at?
A good question. I think that there's nothing that says you have to have it inspected. Oftentimes when a system is bought or sold, it's inspected. A great time would be when it's getting pumped out. Like the septic pumping should occur every 3 to 5 years, depending on your usage and how many people are using that system. But, just a visual inspection, even if it doesn't take a lot. And as a predecessor once called it, the old stomp and sniff inspection. Right. So it doesn't sound the best, but if you were just to walk over your drain field, and if you smell anything, if you notice any ponding, if you do any of those things, that's a real simple inspection that the homeowner can do themselves to make sure that there's no failure out there.
Here's another.
Oh, go ahead.
Here's another good one that people, should do with their septic is go outside. Do you know where your lid is? How many times?
That's a good question.
Have we gone to an inspection and the seller doesn't even know where the lid is? And so the inspector's got to go pop it around the yard, dig it up somewhere. It's just going to cost a lot more money. So again, if you're on a septic, you need to know where the lid is. Don't you think? That's simple. Go out there and find it, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Here's another question I got for you. People put stuff in their septic systems to keep them, enzymes, I guess. I don't really know what that is. Is that a good way to keep the system operating longer by putting these types of products into the system?
Yeah, so I've heard so many different things. One of the funnier ones I've ever heard is get a pound of ground beef, put it in a Ziploc bag. It gets hot down here in the summer. Throw it up on your roof for a week, and then once that week's over, throw that bag or empty that bag into your septic system, and everything that was in there is going to really take care of your septic system. I had a pumper tell me, it's probably best if you just, grill those up as hamburgers, eat them, and then just let nature take its course that way. because really, we are a big part of what makes a septic system work. We have a lot of stuff in our guts that have that bacteria that breaks everything down. And so I've heard so many different things. Some are things that you buy, like Pete, what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
And some of the things are just some mother's recipes and things like that they want to put in there. Honestly, if you just use your system the way it's intended, there's really no need to put anything down there.
So
Really?
don't throw the rotten hamburger down your septic.
I wouldn't.
Don't do
Just, yeah.
Well, again, if you're new to and you're not aware of them, you use the wrong toilet papers. You put things on there because you think you're in the city, and they get plugged. And this is why you don't have. Alice always talks about sewer scopes, on in getting those inspected, and it's a smart thing to do your septic too, because if it fails, it's going to fail you on a terrible time in a worse condition, and it's going to cost you a lot more money. So taking care of it, like so many other things in your property, really makes a whole lot of sense, whether you're selling it or not. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you sell it. If you're selling your place, then you need to have it inspected and know what's going on with it, know where the lids are. So help people get the permits, those types of things, and really make it smart to deal with your septic system, because it's such a big and important part of any sale or just living in a rural community.
Yeah, and you said some great things there, Pete. One of them, and to kind of backtrack a little, if people would, once they get their septic systems or their tanks, the lid exposed, have whoever's pumping that out put a riser on it. That's going to save you time and honestly money down the road, because
a riser, meaning an identifying mark or something.
Yeah, it basically will go on top of where the lid opening is, and there'll be one of those green lids that you kind of look for when you go out there, and that's going to save you in the long run.
Right, because a lot of times lids are broken off those tanks, aren't they? That's a big problem.
Oh yeah, yep. And then I always kind of make a joke out of it, of every time that the shovel comes off on those pumper trucks, the price goes up. So
that's true. One of them was charging $80 an hour to dig the lid out.
Yep. Yep.
I'll do it for you for 40.
There you go.
I think you would like that. I don't think you'd like that. That's cheap. $80 is cheap for that, because what they're going to find is going to be crazy.
No.
Well, folks, we're wrapping up here. We've had a very educational episode with Marty Easter of DEQ talking about septics. Pete Belcastro, Alice Lema, wish you a very, very wonderful Southern Oregon weekend. This broadcast will repeat tomorrow at 6 p.m. on the same station, KCMX News Radio 880. Thanks for listening. We'll have another wonderful episode next week, so stay tuned. Have a beautiful weekend. Bye now.